My name is Christopher Williams. I'm a co-founder of AORTIC and founding chairman of AORTICHOG. I would like to start by welcoming everybody. I don't know what the time is in various parts of the continent where you may be listening, but right here on the west coast of Canada, the day is just breaking. It's just about 8 o'clock in the morning. So in any way, I welcome you all. And I would again like to express appreciation to AstraZeneca for hosting us, Clavet. Thank you very much for your guidance. And also, I would like to thank Mrs. Roderick, Ms. Wilson, and others at the AORTIC office in Cape Town. Now, if I could find a way of shutting this down here. Yep, there we go. So this is the third in a series of webinars, and in the last two, we spent some time discussing the AORTICHOG clinical trials protocol on acute leukemia in Nigerians. And the goal of today's meeting is to expand that topic to involve clinical research in general, as well as postgraduate training in hematology and oncology in Africa in general. There will be 6 presentations, including the one that I'm making right now. Each one would last 15 minutes. I urge each presenter to keep to the time allotted for their presentation. Questions will follow each presentation if there is adequate time. And also after the 6th presentation, the entire session hopefully will last about 2 hours. Questions should be submitted in writing in the Q&A bubble, and they will be read to the presenters by the chairman at the appropriate time. Now, cancer has been a challenge all over the world, and but things started to change around 1970, especially in developing countries, in the United States in particular. Before that time, we knew very little or nothing about cancer. And that was actually acknowledged by Peter Roos, who received a Nobel Prize for the work that he did earlier in the early period of the 20th century on animal viruses. But following that, after 1970, as I said earlier, things started to evolve rather rapidly, especially after the U.S. National Cancer Act had been signed to law by President Nixon in 1971. Now, what I'm going to try to do today is give you a little bit of insight about how this actually happened. Many of you probably know about it, and those who don't will probably might find it enlightening. Now, this is a diagram to illustrate the history of cancer chemotherapy, beginning from the early 1900s, when animal models were being developed, as just spoke about Peter Roos's work about that time. And at that time, it was realized that some types of animal cancers were transplantable because they were caused by viruses that could be transplanted from one animal to the other, it was felt that the same might apply to humans, but that actually never materialized. We never found any virus of that nature. That we could talk more about that later. Then there was the Second World War, and it was realized that some of the chemical agents that were used during the First World War actually had the anti-cancer effect. And so that is how we came to know about the nitrogen mustards. And then from there, other anti-cancer agents were developed, including the what we call the antimetabolites, the antifols, the thiopurines. And it's about that time that the concept of a cure of cancer was developed, and using some of these agents in animal cancer models. There was the L1210 animal leukemia that was used as a primary screening model. So the concept of care was developed about this time, and how that could be used in human management is now the subject of the next slide. Now, you could see that by between 1963 and 1970, we were beginning to talk about the care of acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children, as well as Hodgkin lymphoma, resulting from the use of the various agents that had been developed earlier in the century, including vinca alkaloids, the alkylating agents, the antimetabolites. And then by 1971, a lot of political movements had been going on, and I will allude to them later. And that led to the National Cancer Act of the United States, signed to law by Nixon in December 1971. That was to kind of accelerate the development of the progress in cancer control. The National Cancer Institute investment led to creation of 80, and by 1990 there was evidence of progressive decline in cancer mortality, at least in the United States and some other developed countries. By 1995, 1996, imatinib was created, Gleevec, for the management of chronic myelogenous leukemia. And thereafter, other tyrosine kinases, tyrosine kinase inhibitors emerged, have been used in the management of various types of cancers, including colon cancer, as well as lung cancer. By the turn of the century, molecular profiling emerged. And again, by 2010, there was evidence of further acceleration of decrease in mortality of cancer. So this is what is usually presented as evidence of the victory against cancer. I mean, of course, cancer is still a public health problem in various parts of the world, but there is no evidence, there is no doubt that progress has been made in a very significant way. Now I'm going to try to talk about a number of people who have made major differences in this advancement. Now, the least known person who has done most of the work is probably this lady here, Mary Woodard Lasker. Mary Woodard Lasker was actually a saleswoman and entrepreneur in New York about the end of the Second World War. And she was a socialite in New York City. And but then her mother became ill with terminal cancer. And that was how she got involved in cancer. So she went to the predecessor of the American Cancer Society looking for help and found that there was nothing was happening in the office of the society. And he found the people who call themselves the experts and the cancer expert had no idea about what was going on. So she went back to her business colleagues all over New York City and raised tons and tons of money, got into politics, and then got the American Congress involved in cancer control. And that was how it was possible to lobby somebody like President Nixon to accept to underwrite and enact the American National Cancer Act, which led to massive national investment in the war against cancer. Today, the highest honor in medical research in America is named after Mary Woodard Lasker and her husband, the so-called Albert and Mary Lasker Prize. It's more or less like the Nobel Prize of Medicine in America. So now I would like to spend some time talking about the pioneers, people who did what that had brought about this dramatic progress in the control of cancer. The first person here would be Howard Skipper, who used his model of mouse leukemia, L1210, to develop the concept of curability of cancer, which was subsequently proven correct by clinical trials in acute lymphoblastic leukemia, as well as Burkitt's lymphoma in Africa, Hodgkin lymphoma, and subsequently the concept of the effectiveness of adjuvant chemotherapy in breast cancer and other cancers, colon cancer. So this is how acute lymphoblastic leukemia was overcome in the Western countries. Before 1970, that was about the time that I was in medical school, the 10-year survival in acute lymphoblastic leukemia was less than 5%. So that would be, so like 1968, 69, thereabout. Then there was the emergence of what we now know as the cooperative research organizations. The first one to be created was the Acute Leukemia Group B, which was headed by no other person than our own James Holland. So that organization received heavy US government funding, and that translated into very rapid progress against childhood acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which was a top killer of children in developed countries before that time. And you could see that by the time 1975 to 1977, when I was a fellow in New York City with James Holland, acute lymphoblastic leukemia had become almost curable at the rate of about 60%. And now, of course, the cure rate is about 90% or more. So this is Dr. Min-Chui Lee, one of the very earliest medical oncologists. So he worked at the Sloan Kettering Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City in the late 60s, when he developed a treatment program for the management and care of choriocarcinoma and testicular cancer, even at very, very advanced stages, helping show that this disease could be cured by chemotherapy using methotrexate and actinomycin D and other anti-tumor agents. So this is Min-Chui Lee. This is James Holland. As I said earlier, the first chairman of acute leukemia group B, the group that ultimately overcame childhood leukemia. For that effort, James Holland was honored with the Lascaux Prize in Medical Research in 1972. As I said earlier, James Holland, as you all know, is a co-founder of AORTIC and the first scientific advisor to AORTIC. This is Dr. Emil Tom Fry, who was doing exactly what James Holland was doing in New York City. He was doing this at the National Cancer Institute in Washington, and he became a very close associate of James Holland. He subsequently became the founding director of Dana-Farber Cancer Center at Harvard University in Boston. And these three groups, guys here, Vincent DeVita, Gordon Zubrod, and Paul P. Carbon. They were working at the National Cancer Institute in the United States and developed the MOP treatment regimen, MOPP, combination of nitrogen mustard, oncovin, procarbazine, and prednisone, which turned out to have been the first treatment regimen for Hodgkin lymphoma, which of course has now been superseded by the ABVD treatment regimen. Now, this is Bernie Fisher. Now, Bernie Fisher was a courageous surgeon in New York City. At the time I was in New York City, in the late 70s, surgeons would not allow their patients to undergo adjuvant chemotherapy after surgery because it did not believe in the concept of the curability of cancer. But this guy here, Bernie Fisher, was an exception. He joined medical oncologists very early and accepted the idea of curability of breast cancer and went on to create the National Surgical Adjuvant Breast and Bowel Project, what we now refer to as NSABP. NSABP has been responsible for a series of treatment protocols, which have led to great advancement in the management of breast cancer as we know it today. So by 1973, enough medical knowledge had been created through laboratory and clinical research that the field of medical oncology was officially established as a subspecialty of internal medicine, evolving as it were out of hematology, with chemotherapy as a tool of its trade. The surgeons were a little bit later, took a couple of decades after that, for the surgical oncology to emerge as a discipline of, as a subspecialty of surgery. So most of what I've said today are in my book, Cancer and AIDS, which I will recommend to you for the reading. Thank you very much. Okay, at this time, I think I'm just going to go on and ask our good friend, Professor Nazik Hamed, to make her presentation. I would like to leave a little bit early, and so we'll be advancing her presentation on vision for postgraduate training in Africa to commence now. So I've known Professor Hamed for quite a while. A very delightful lady. She is associate professor at the Queen's University in the eastern part of Canada. She's about 3 hours ahead of me. And so, so I guess she should be able to take over at this point. Are you ready, Nazik?
I am presenting as a co-chair for the Education and Training Committee, and really we think postgraduate medical education is one of the most important aspects of cancer control in the continent. Sometimes health professional education gets a bad reputation because people think it's, especially of specialist oncologists, is that expensive, time-consuming, and not attuned to the local disease reality. But the fact is, professionals are invariably the leaders, the planners, and the policymakers of the health system, and they're a valuable resource for training of other health professionals. So the vision at AORTIC has been articulated by the Education and Training Committee several years ago. It's mainly about an education that's Afrocentric, local, context relevant, inclusive, equitable, and culturally appropriate. At the same time, it has to be excellent and meet the global accreditation standards and global quality assurance. So most of the training programs are producing high quality oncologists. And one way to look at what type of workforce or physician workforce that we want, we can look at the WHO Global Strategy Workforce 2030, in which the overall goal is universal availability. You want to have the right number. You want to have patients able to access the right physicians. You want them to be high quality in terms of that there's confidence in them, they're acceptable, and that they cover all the disease entities that the local population has. And so the transformative scale up, according to the WHO, is that you need the three components. One is quantity, varying the codes. So quantity is how many, quality is are they doing the right job, and relevance is are they able to work in the environment they're in. So the Lancet Commission, that's one of the most important documents that sought to be 100 years after the Flexner report in 2010, came up with what are kind of reforms that you need to improve health professional education. So you have an structural and an institution, and the way you teach, which mostly has to be IT empowered and competent division driven, and institutional, which is global network and academic system. And you do that, enabling action is to invest. So you need to invest in order to create new programs. You need to mobilize leadership, bring the leadership together. You make sure that the accreditation is aligned so that the right doctors practice in the right setting, and you strengthen people coming together and share learning. And so if you look at how do we, what are the components of postgraduate medical education, this framework will tell you that there are 4 components. One is the program development, implementation. So the program itself, how you develop it, how you implement it, how you evaluate it, and how you accredit it. And then what's happening within the program, which is the curriculum, the teaching, the mentoring, and how do you teach with the instructional strategies, and how you assess that your learners are actually getting the education that they need. And then, of course, the teachers who are doing all the teaching and the mentoring, you need to make sure that they thrive that they are vital. And so you need to make sure that they get all the professional development they need, that the university is treating them well, they're getting promoted when they are supposed to be promoted, and all, if there's any red tape or archaic structures, that needs to be removed so that you can actually retain them in the public sector and have them teach. And then educational scholarship, which is mostly a new concept, is that you really need to write, publish about your educational endeavors. So publications are not just about scientific stuff. If you are creating a good program, you want to share that knowledge with the rest of the world. So that, and especially in the continent, and also if you are creating new strategies, or even if you are doing some sort of look at what's the best way to share curricula or to assess the program in any way. And so the goal for each program will be to train oncologists who will provide high quality patient care, research, education, and leadership, and in all the aspects of control, prevention, and eradication. And the concept of social accountability comes in, which really means that you need willingness and ability to respond to the needs of the society, patients, and the health and health-related sectors, and you foster competencies in healthcare, medical education, and research. So let's say we take an example program, and maybe by the end of 2 years, if you have, let's say, a medical oncology training program, you want the learners to be able to select cost-effective and safe systemic therapy, which means chemotherapy and targeted therapy. They need to conduct interprofessional education. So it has to be, especially in Africa, you have to make sure that the nurses, the pharmacists, everyone is included in your educational activities. And you need to apply basic research methodologies for cancer detection, preventions, and community surveillance and treatment. The way to look at any program structure is the most commonly used one is the World Federation of Medical Education, WFME, which is part of the WHO. And this is now kind of universal structure that people use and to evaluate themselves and to accredit programs. And there are 9, it used to be 6, but now there are 9. So the mission and the outcomes, the educational program itself, the assessment of the trainees, what type of trainees you take, what type of trainers, the educational resources, the program evaluation, the governance and administration, and the fact that you're doing continuous renewal, you're making sure that your program is on target. And so when it comes to faculty shortage and the fact that occasionally when you're starting a new program, you may not have enough faculty to teach, and given the day we're in, I have to say in Africa, the uptake of technology in teaching has been far ahead of uptake of technology in the West. And so what we call this is the continent went from the digital divide when people did not have any computers in the 90s to the digital skip, where they went straight to smart devices and smart cell phones. And so what you need to know is that there is now what we exist in what's called the biomedical knowledge cloud. The residents or the fellows can access a lot of information online. And so our way of teaching should change to facilitate that, mostly case discussion, mostly trying to find the knowledge gap and how to apply that to the patient in front of you, because just regurgitating what is the signs and symptoms of a disease, they can actually access that online. And so the question is always, what kind of curriculum? Is it a global curriculum? Is it a local curriculum? There is the ASCO-ESMO global curriculum, which for medical oncology, for example. And I think we should actively advocate that we will be included in that curriculum in the future if we are going to adapt any of it. And of course, we have to think of career pathways. So what is the best way of producing hematologists, oncologists in the continent? Is it should be separation of radiation oncologists? You should have medical oncologists who treat malignant hematology, or should we have hematologists who treat both malignant hematology and benign hematology? These are things that we need as a continent to come together now that especially malignant hematology, people need to advocate for it. A lot of the time it's left behind in some programs and curricula. And these are malignancies that can be cured. Therefore, there should be a lot of emphasis on it. And so people should think of creating regional training program that can service more than one country. And they should think of harmonization and how to come together in program evaluation and implementation. And so the vision is that you want to mobilize knowledge, bring as many experts as possible, engage in critical reasoning and ethical conduct so that you produce doctors who are competent to participate in patient-centered population systems, who are also members of a locally responsive and globally connected team. That's the articulated vision. And ideally, we should bring all African program directors together to collect data and create a map of the landscape of postgraduate training, optimize regionalization of training, create institutional agreement that are conducive of sharing of resources within the continent, so that the countries that don't have enough training programs or have none could be trained in other countries without the barriers of visas and also economic resources. And you collaborate with international educators and program directors to share resources, including online materials to address faculty shortage, and create a learning community. People should come together and say, what was wrong with my program? What is good, especially the good part. People need to share the good practices that allow them to create programs that have had a big impact in the continent, and then define the competencies and the skills that you actually need. And so hopefully AORTIC will continue to lead that. And I think we have a number of young oncologists with us, and also some of our pioneers, and hopefully they will come together to coordinate that effort and make sure that countries that don't have training programs get access to training programs all over the continent. And why does it make sense for us to come together in Africa? Because we have similarities in burden of cancer and population needs. We can share resources, we can share the workload, we can exchange faculty, we can exchange learners like residents, we can do collaborative research, we can make sure that come up with our own accreditation standards and set standards for social accountability and address globalized medical education together. So this is my last slide. I've been very fortunate to teach in Sudan, in Ethiopia, and of course, I have the Kenyatta Teaching Hospital has a special place in my heart, as I had the chance to work with the wonderful fellows, and of course with our pioneer, Professor Abinia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Nazik, I don't see any questions hanging on here. So, but Nazik, you said you're going to you have another meeting. You have another webinar to attend. So, may I just ask one or two questions before you go?
Yes, please.
Good. So I enjoyed your presentation very, very well. I think the presentation is very, very relevant, not only to developed countries, but it has a lot of ideas for Africa. But as you very well know, right now in Africa, the way medical oncology, the way oncology is practiced is a bit different from North America, as both of us know. There is the so-called clinical oncology, and there is then another type of oncology, which would probably include medical oncology. I don't actually know anybody who is really practicing medical oncology at this time. And as you rightly alluded, you have situations where radiation oncologists practice oncology. What looks like medical oncology. So how would you address that kind of situation? What kind of oncology do you think would be oncological practice? Would you think is relevant to the African continent as it is right now, given the present economic situation and the status of the healthcare system in much of Africa?
I think this is a very difficult question. It's always relevant, the career pathways that need to be redefined. I think historically, clinical oncology made sense because you will train people who can provide both radiation and chemotherapy. Although, given what we know now about how much supportive care, how much knowledge that you need to give, it's people have started to question that model. I know in Kenya, Professor Abinya has started the medical oncology training program. So there are some instances now that so people are moving in that direction. It will take time, it will take effort, and it will take people coming together, especially now we're treating all people with comorbidities, we're treating older people, we are using more chemotherapy, we don't maybe more targeted therapy, which are actually more internal medicine requiring than even conventional chemotherapy. And then of course, we don't know about immunotherapy in the future. That's for sure need to be taken care of by internists. That's my bias. But I think that's why people need to come together and also need to think of the academic systems, what sort of academic system that they want. They need to discuss with their universities and together come up with what is the best sort of training, because you can, if you have a program that has only 3 years of clinical oncology, it's going to be very difficult in this day and age to make sure that the residents have all the competencies and the skills that they need. And so I don't have the answers. I think the efforts started by Professor Abinya and others are good, but that is exactly why the career pathways need to be discussed all the time until we come to an agreement as to what the best way. Yeah.
Fantastic. I agree with you entirely. And that's actually.
Can I add?
You are the next to come on. So
yes, no, I just wanted to add to Dr. Nazix that we are also now doing a radiation oncology, not clinical oncology, but a radiation oncology master's program at the University of Nairobi.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, so I think this is a natural transition to the next presentation, which will be given by Professor Nicholas Anthony Otieno Abinya, a very good friend of mine. We have known each other now for, oh gee, how long? We shouldn't be dating ourselves right here, Anthony. So Professor Abinya, Otieno Abinya is the professor of medicine I believe at the, I'm not very, I don't have your CV here with me. So, but everybody knows Professor Abinya. So why not take it on from there, please, and let us have your presentation, which I believe is on research and training in medical oncology in Kenya. Thank you.
I didn't prepare a talk. Actually, that is probably off context. And that is outcome of severe chemotherapy-induced neutropenia in the COVID era. And can't move, eh? So the background is that WHO grade 4 neutropenia, and that is absolute neutrophil counts less than 0.5 times 10 to the power of 9 per liter, as we all know, carry very high risks of infection. And that the risk of infection and death are higher in values less than 0.1 times 10 to the 9 per liter, and that is what is referred to as profound neutropenia. We also are aware that cancer chemotherapy, especially in the practice of the malignant hematology, is the one that is most commonly associated with even severer risk of neutropenia away from bone marrow transplant. So we present 4 patients who develop profound neutropenia while undergoing cancer chemotherapy for malignant hematology in this COVID era. The case 1 was a 72-year-old male with primary fusion lymphoma. I started him on the MACOB protocol and not on the RCHOP protocol as expected because of some reasons. And this is given weekly. The MACOB protocol, as described by Climo and Connors in 1985, did not, that was in the pre-GCSF era. But because this patient looked very weak, and he was actually, with the first dose, he developed very severe neutropenia, I decided to build GCSF with every week of chemotherapy, even those even numbered weeks, particularly the vincristine bleomycin weeks that were not expected to be complicated by severe neutropenia. The simple reason being that if you had week 1, that was doxorubicin cyclophosphamide, then week 2, the neutropenia was still going to be carried forward. So following week 3 of treatment, he developed severe mucositis and dehydration and was admitted in shock. Absolute neutrophil count of 0.02 times 10 to the power 9 per liter was registered during admission, and he was managed on antibiotics, parenteral nutritions, and made full recovery. And by the way, he was fever-free despite profound neutropenia at this stage. And unfortunately, he discontinued treatment at week 8, citing inability to get more treatment, but he never developed pneumonia, anything like a fever in the COVID era. Now, case 2 was a 45-year-old male with anaplastic large T-cell lymphoma. Now, again, rather atypical in that the Ki-67 index was 92%. And he started off also with a pancytopenic picture, HIV negative, and treated again on MACOB. And again, I built in the GCSF on the weekly protocols. And he walked into the office prior to week 4 with an absolute neutrophil count that read 0, basically 0, and he walked from home. And I put him on GCSF antibiotic. He went home. He was never admitted, and he made full recovery of that neutropenia and has had the week 9 of chemotherapy. Well, because again, I feared that week 10 of MACOB would probably kill him, I have now transitioned him to CHOP to complete the rest of the treatment. Case 3, a 53-year-old male on treatment for myeloblastic transformation of chronic myeloid leukemia who underwent induction with 7+3. Now he registered maximum temperature of 38 degrees centigrade on day 16 of chemotherapy at the time when he had profound neutropenia. But again, the temperatures took only 2 days, managed on antibiotics, and did not last like in the previous cases where we have seen people developing fever in acute myeloid leukemia. Induction tend to develop them for a longer period of time. And he was managed with vancomycin and amikacin and made complete and made full recovery and went into complete remission with only about 2-3 days of fever, which is very, very unusual for us in the acute myeloid leukemia induction, and is now on consolidation. Now, case 4 was a 46-year-old male who was referred from a neighboring country with a few days of hemorrhage. When he came in under diagnosis of an acute leukemia, when he came in, he was obese at a BMI of 43. He had extensive petechiae, ecchymosis, and gum bleeding. Peripheral blood showed a pancytopenia, but bone marrow that was taken in that other country had suggested acute myeloid leukemia, possibly acute promyelocytic leukemia. And he was reluctant to have another bone marrow. The slides that was stained in the country where he was referred from were not too clear, but we had to rely on them. And then we tried to get flow cytometry on peripheral blood, and again, this was not very clear because of the very severe pancytopenia. But bone marrow was packed with premature cells, promyelocytes, and some blast. Samples were taken for flow cytometry, cytogenetics, and molecular characterization. And this is the stained slide that he came with from the other country. It was not too clear to decide whether this was APL or non-APL AML. Same slide. On day 1, he developed a tender swelling on the dorsum of his hand following venipuncture, and the temperature rose to about 37.5. He was managed with intravenous amoxicillin, clavulanate, and prophylactic ciprofloxacin continued. And we started ATRA at that time because on suspicion. 3 days later, we went ahead and started induction with again 7+3, and the temperature settled on 2 days of induction. Now, ATRA was started on day -3. Then we decided to go full blast because we had not got a confirmation whether this was APL or non-APL AML. And so we added SEM3. On day 11, platelets were 45, and they spat out sputum streaked with blood. So we got alarmed because we had kept his platelets above 50. So he was given, this was a weekend, and he was given non-irradiated platelets. And we were worried because from the previous, and we knew that at this stage doing non-irradiated platelet transfusion, even if apheresis platelets would be complicated by fever. And the entire day he had actually been shivering and there was no fever. And 5 p.m. That day, about is when he got platelets. By 8 p.m. he had a temperature of 37.7 degrees centigrade. Intravenous paracetamol was administered, and by 11 p.m. the temperature rose to 38.8. Again, we started in amikacin and vancomycin. Unfortunately, by day 13, there was no fever whatsoever, and antibiotics were discontinued by day 17 because he had had absolute neutrophil count of 0.5 and there was no fever. On day 9, we confirmed that he had a 15-17 translocation, and so we continued with ATRA, and he is now doing his bone marrow on Tuesday next week. Now he's an outpatient now with no fever, and he's reconstituted most of his peripheral blood. Now, the discussion and conclusion here is that profound neutropenia is inevitable in acute leukemia induction, particularly acute myeloid leukemia, and also is seen commonly in highly aggressive subtypes of non-Hodgkin's lymphomas. For acute leukemia, complete remission rates in most developing countries really tend to be rather lowish, and particularly in public hospitals. Now, if you look at poor environmental hygiene in low-income countries, and we have mentioned this many times, because you may do the same treatment that is done elsewhere, but you find that you are struggling to get these patients into remission. And so we have always suspected that poor, and even if the hospital takes all the precautions and is neat, the environmental hygiene generally is poor and is an impediment to delivery of effective intensive chemotherapy in this setting. Now, that is a picture of our capital city, Nairobi. If you look at downtown Nairobi, you are just fine. You look like you're looking at any other city anywhere. But if you look at one of the biggest slums in the continent of Africa called Kibera slums, again in the city of Nairobi. Now look at that. There will be members of staff who actually live in these settings, in these settlements, and come to work. And they come with quite a heavy burden of bags. So the lessons that we learned is that during the COVID era, there has been some improvement in environmental hygiene in general. There has been cleaning of hands, masking, contact surfaces are washed, hand washing, and maintenance of social distancing. And this, we have seen, has resulted in improvement in hygiene in general. And so we expect that there will be better treatment outcomes. And this, to me, is a lesson to policymakers in Africa. They should learn that actually a clean environment in general, not just the hospital or anything else, the streets, everything should be clean. And with this, we could actually improve our outcomes in treatment of these kind of patients. And I end my study there. I just want to acknowledge the patients, our hematologist, Dr. Githaiga, the Department of Laboratory Medicine, who has helped me with the evaluation of this patient. And I have had constant discussions with Professor Pier Paolo Picaluga at the University of Bologna, Department of Hematology, concerning the treatment of these patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Binya. Anybody has any questions for Professor Binya? just an observation of on a personal note. Well, COVID is a pandemic, and we are all watching and keeping distances and wearing masks and washing our hands several times a day. Now, personally, I have observed, now I'm talking from Canada, from the west coast of Canada, where the temperature is now dropping down to almost, 0 degrees centigrade. So normally by this time, I would have gone through about 2 or 3 bouts of cold symptoms and all that kind of thing. But this year, it has been an exception. I mean, this is a clinical trial of 1 out of 1. So I really believe that the increased attention to hygiene and self-care is likely to improve everybody's welfare health-wise throughout the world. So even you're talking about your experience in the slum of Kibra, it is happening right here on the west coast of Canada. Thank you very much. On that note, I think we'll proceed and go to the next presentation, which would be given by, I believe, Dr. Mohammed Izzy. Are you ready, Dr. Izzy? I know you're a very good man, and I know of your activities in the postgraduate training in East Africa and Kenya. And I would like to take this opportunity to compliment the Kenyan group, the Kesho group, for the very good work you're doing in postgraduate training in hematology and oncology. It is a model that I hope that other parts of Africa will emulate as we go along, as has already been alluded to by Professor Hamad. Okay, Dr. Ezzi, please take it
on. Good evening, everyone. It's evening over here. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Screen sharing.
Yep.
So I'm going to talk about cancer trials in Africa. What are the lessons that we have learned so far from the cancer trials? So if you Google the world map at night, and this is what you see, and that is we also known infamously as the dark continent, because we don't have so many lights at night, and so we are really quite dark at night. And so this is generally the picture out there in the Western world. But in terms of population, we are not so dark. We have so much. We constitute like 17% of the world's population. And the reason I'm putting this is because are we dark in research? If you look at this map that I got from the ClinicalTrials.Gov, this is all the trials on Africa that have been registered in this website. If you look at Africa, we have only about 1,000 cancer studies currently happening that have been registered currently at the ClinicalTrials.Gov. And compare this with countries like USA, where we have about 40,000. And then we have countries like Europe, about 20,000. And countries like in China, about 12,000. In spite of us having 15 to 17% of the population, we only generate about 1 to 2% of the total world's research. So we are still dark in terms of research also. But we have never been dark. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel. Malignant hematology is even worse. Only 10 studies had been registered in Africa, the ClinicalTrials.Gov website. However, this is an underestimate. I'm sure there must be more studies happening. They just have not been registered so far. But that are generating most research in Africa are especially Egypt and South Africa. Egypt has constitutes mostly about half of all the current research in Africa, and similarly South Africa also generates about 40% of the current research. The rest is all divided with the rest of Africa, which is also known as the sub-Saharan Africa, and south of Sahara, north of Limpopo. And in this sub-Saharan Africa, East Africa plays a major role, and also in West Africa, Nigeria plays a major role in generating research. So this is a study that was just recently published in the Global Oncology, which shows the number of countries that have an open clinical trial currently. And as you can see, South Africa and Egypt constitutes the majority of the study. So if North Africa as a top researchers, followed by South Africa, and then we have East Africa in between. So I don't want to sound all gloom and doom. If you look over the years, Africa has been making an effort in catching up with the rest of the world in doing research. If you look at the trends in registered studies in clinical trials from the year 2000 to 2019, about 20 years of data. In 2000, only 11 studies in oncology had been registered in this website. And as we come down to 2019, about more than 100 plus studies have been registered in this website. Similarly, if you look at the publications that African scholars and African scientists are publishing, this is only in cancer. We started with around 30 publications in 2000, and by 2019 we had around 1100 publications. And you can see there's an exponential rise in the number of publications in for African cancer research. Similarly, if you look at the trends in the number of African countries publishing, so this is the African number that they started publishing. For example, in 2000, only about 11 countries had published, 11 African countries had published a paper in one of the journals. And by 2019, so 11 is around only 20% of the population. And most of these publications were from Egypt and South Africa. In 2019, we have about 45 countries out of 54 African countries that have made a publication in any of the journals and whose studies people can access. So there's a great news, and this is the light at the end of the tunnel that shows that Africa is trying to catch up in cancer research. So how are the African trials done by cancer types? So the most commonly researched subject is breast cancer, and this is in keeping with the fact that breast cancer is the most common cancer in Africa. Then we have cervical cancer, and then Kaposi and cervical cancer as the next major cancer groups that have been studied. And this is by fact that Africa is an endemic, is a hotspot for HIV-associated malignancies. So these cancers tend to get more research opportunities because they are generally found more in the continent in vis-a-vis with other continents. Unfortunately, prostate, only 2 cancer trials by cancer. These are open trials, that studies that are currently ongoing. We only have like 2 prostate cancers, and in fact that we have most of our male cancers are prostate cancers. So who are the big boys who are supporting us to do these studies? As I've mentioned, we have mostly North Africa is the biggest boys, and then followed by South Africa. So as mentioned, South Africa and North Africa are the major boys in research in Africa. Most of the studies come from there. And then we have a very sparse population, mostly towards the East Africa and a bit to the West Africa in the Sub-Saharan African region. Central Africa has very minimal studies happening there. So if you look at who is supporting our studies, interestingly, it is academic institutions that are doing most of the studies in Africa, vis-a-vis the Western world where most of the studies have a major pharmaceutical company involvement. All of the major land-breaking or landmark studies that we hear about in the international journals are mostly supported by pharma. Unfortunately, the cancer studies that are supported by government agencies are very minimal, and that is where we tend to lack most. Because if the government is not supporting your studies, it will not also be able to formulate policies that could be beneficial for its populations, for its people. So, and other thing that really the thing about the thing where the academic institutions are, these are mostly in our setup, are mostly students who are doing their postgraduate studies, and they have very limited funding from the academia, and the studies may not be so wow, and hence they may not make much major impact in global or in the regional or the global population. However, we have some cancer research projects that are going on, and so these are some of the cancer research projects. We have most of them in Egypt, Nigeria, Uganda has the most cancer research projects, about 22, and these cancer research projects are mostly supported by AORTIC. So who gives the dollars? Who are the major sponsors for our studies? Most of the studies have an international collaboration in our setup. For example, if you look at United States, it supports most of the clinical trials. It is the major collaborator of study for African studies. Switzerland has also a big number of clinical trials, but the reason Switzerland, there's only one major sponsor in Switzerland, and that is Hoffmann de la Roche. Roche is the major pharmaceutical company that provides research support in Africa. Egypt, most of their studies or sponsor institutions are being through academia. So where are the big boys, the pharma? If you look at the pharma, Roche, as I mentioned, is currently, this is in the year 2019 thereabout, was supporting 19 clinical trials in Africa, and most of the studies it is supporting is in North Africa. North Africa is also under a region known as MENA, the Middle East North African region, and because of close proximity to Europe, they just need to cross the Mediterranean Sea and they are in Europe. They have been supported a lot by pharma. Then we have Novartis, then we have 5 pharmaceutical companies supporting research in Africa. There was a professor once told me in South Africa that the reason why a pharma tends to select patients from Africa, increase its heterogeneity. They got a population from Africa for their study, so that it becomes that whatever their study becomes universal. At one point, he got so frustrated with the farmers using his clinic for research that because they just wanted like 3 patients from the 2,000 of the whole. It was like, why do they just want 3 patients from my study? I have like 20 I can give them. And hence, they said like, so for him, he thinks that most of the pharma wants to do study in Africa, not because they have an interest in Africa, it's just that they want their study to look global. So why is it necessary to do cancer research? One, if you have research, you need to do research so that you can monitor and you can have basic research, epidemiology research, clinical health economics, and for research to occur, you need to have mentorship and leadership. You need to have ethical, legal, and social implications. You need to have resources and investments in funding and human capital, in the infrastructure and the partnerships. And the research that you come out with, be it basic research, epidemiological research, or clinical research, Those research can be applied in cancer control planning, and then you can implement those policies, and then you can further do research on monitoring and evaluation of those policies. So research has a core role in cancer screening, diagnosis, and treatment, and cancer policies. So what are some of the challenges that we feel in Africa have? There is most of the studies lack scientific training, research metabolism. So most of the trainees most of the postgraduate students are not thoroughly trained into research methodology. So they do not have an idea which methodology to apply and how to apply in various studies. There is insufficient interaction between university research departments and government departments. And this sometimes leads that the research done by university may not be implemented by the government because the government had no idea about that research. Or a research that the government department wants to do may not be feasible or doable by university. There is lack of confidence on research findings. Most foreigners look down on research done by African researchers, thinking that these people may have just sat under a tree and cooked up some numbers and come up with the research findings. The other thing is there's duplication of research studies. And this duplication of research studies sometimes leads to waste of the little resources that we have. For example, a study is done in Kenya about breast cancer. Then somebody in Tanzania does a similar study on breast cancer, almost having a similar population. If those two countries had, or those two research institutions had collaborated and then done one umbrella study about it, they would have gotten a better research findings, and they would have used wisely their resources. There's lack of conduct for researchers. So researchers do not know what it means to take an informed consent, how to ethically behave, and how to ethically handle the research. There's lack of educative administrative assistance. So the researcher is now also playing a role of administration, is trying to interact, sending mails, looking at finances for research at the same time, is also collecting data. Lack of library support. So the researcher spends most of his time looking for journals where he could get his literature review articles, instead of the library supporting him that you need to go to this journal and this is where the paper is and this is where you get your literature. And another major challenge that African researchers have is language barrier. We are made up of 54 countries with different dialects, different language. For Kenya itself has 47 tribes with 47 languages. So this just put it in effect. If you tell an Englishman or a Frenchman that he has to do a study whose content will be in Kiswahili, in Bantu, will be in Nigerian dialect, will be in Arabic, will be in Gujarati, he would get lost. And most of Africans, English and France is not our mother language. So there's some language barriers and also research. So, but regardless of the challenges, do the people who are in training, do they want research in them? Do they want to go into research? So this study was conducted by Fidel Rubagumya. He did a study in Tanzania where he asked the postgraduate students their willingness to do cancer research. And if you look at the graph, most of these students, most of these medical master postgraduate students were in the favor of doing research. Instead, they wanted research methodology should be compulsory in their curriculum. They wanted to include research time into their studies, and they wanted to be included and they should be given a different research time. But is the environment conducive for these patients? If you look at the tables, The table before, the graph was more towards the right, where people are strongly agreeing about how they want to do research and how they want to get involved in research. But if you look, is the environment conducive? The graph shifts towards the left, where people are strongly disagreeing. The questions are, did the faculty promotes a motivated? There's no motivation. The environment and the culture does not recognize the research accomplishment of its faculty. The environment is not supportive of research. I think so. This environment and this willingness of postgraduate students to do research studies is the similar all around the countries, regardless of this being a single study. And I think so we need to make this environment conducive for students to conduct research, and this will greatly enhance the research capacity of Africa. So in conclusion, Sub-Saharan Africa has greatly increased both its quantity and quality of its research output. However, it lags behind in STEM, that is science, technology, education, and mathematics. Research lags in STEM studies, where also health studies are involved. And Sub-Saharan Africa relies heavily on international collaborations so as to conduct its research. Only about 2% of all research that is done in Africa is an inter-collaboration between African countries. And this is where we need to make some strides, make some improvement, and try to get people to collaborate within African countries so we get better African-centric research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Izzy. Now, I think there are a few questions out here. Now, let me see. There's a comment or maybe a question from Dr. Omar of Egypt. So Egypt is leading in research and publication. So number one, many PhD students. Number two, availability of funding. Number three, being the main representative of MENA. I don't know what that is. So he says, so where are we going to have, when are we going to have PhD training in the rest of Sub-Sahara Africa or country?
I believe.
So I don't know. First of all, anyway, go ahead, please, Dr. Izzy.
I personally believe that you do not require a PhD to do a study. A study can be done by a specialist, and a PhD will because if a study is done by a master student or a fellow student, he will think broadly, because PhD studies are more of very narrow-minded, looking at a certain problem and how they can solve that problem. So I do not think so. It's more of how many PhDs we are having in Africa. That is why people are doing research. I think so. It's more of the support, both at the regional level, at the national level, at the institution level, to support research, and research being a core mandate of all academic institutions. Maybe Professor Binya can give some further comment on it.
You are right. If PhD alone was research, United States of America would not be anywhere near being researchers.
Exactly.
Yet the bulk of research comes from the United States of America. The people, the likes of Brian Drucker and the rest, never saw the inside of a PhD. And these are big discoverers. So PhD is just a name. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. I agree with both of you. I don't actually understand what the questioner was trying to imply. I mean, there are PhDs in various universities of Africa. So any other questions? Let me see. I don't see any other questions out here. I have a feedback here from Dr. Omar. So I believe one reason which hinders most young doctors to go into research is because of lack of mentorship and bullying by the seniors. How is AORTIC going to break this barrier, especially mentorship? Anybody has any comments to Dr. Omar? I don't see somebody like Professor Abinya being a bully or Dr. Easy, so I don't know where the idea of bullying comes in. Anybody has any comments on that?
Lack of mentorship, maybe yes. Lack of mentorship, maybe yes. I think we are in a stage of development when people are still struggling to get the basics, get what to survive on. And once we get that population that are not necessarily struggling for the basics, then things will continue improving. That's all I can say. Bullying, no, but mentorship, yes, because of that struggle to get the basics first taken care of.
Yes, thank you. I very much appreciate Dr. Izzy's presentation, and one of the points you raised about the poor level of research production in Africa is because of the language barriers and everything. Africa is very, very badly fragmented. And not only that, I mean, apart from the natural fragmentation due to language barrier, there's, you know, the old colonial fragmentation, which is still hanging on. There are not too many African countries that can actually fund research effectively. From monetary point of view, and also the fact that African countries don't seem to realize that you make money by spending money. Cancer research wouldn't be where it is today throughout the world if the American government had not poured in massive amount of money into cancer research, and they still do. You know, you look at a place like the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, has a budget of about $50 billion a year. There is no country in Africa that can match that. The problem of lack of research in Africa is the result of poor governance, and that is why Africa is poor. Until it will be so until Africans begin to realize that they have to find a way to stand on their own feet. By collaborating and international cross-border collaboration and collaborative research effort. But trying to do things individually by institution, that is peanuts. There's no way you can make a dent in world research until you're able to collaborate. And so in one way, I'm very happy that at least we have this AstraZeneca Zoom session. We're able to speak with one another. I think that one of the things that I hope AstraZeneca will agree to do is maintain this platform for AORTIC, that we're able to exchange ideas. And move on now to Dr. Matilda Ogondi. I know that you are from Kenya, and your presentation is going to be on postgraduate training in malignant hematology pathways. So I'm looking very much to hearing from you. Thank you. Please take it on from there.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay. So thank you very much to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak on postgraduate training in malignant hematology. And this takes me to a couple of years back when I was trying to figure out where to go and do my training. So I think for the people who are looking to do training in hematology, I'm glad that this conversation has started, And even just in preparing for this talk, realizing that there are many steps which have been made in the positive. So as Dr. Eze has mentioned, that indeed there's light at the end of the tunnel. And it's, as we continue the discussion, it's just saying how to navigate and make sure that we are moving in a seamless way, and really the different parts of the different countries in Africa moving together. So I think Dr. Nazik really captured a lot about training program. So I will not dwell so much on that. But this gave me an opportunity to get in touch with a few colleagues in different parts and just get to know what is it that's happening in their countries in terms of training for malignant hematology. Then we'll have some questions after that if there are any questions. So I think one of the things Dr. Nazik really covered well, the aspects of curriculum, what are really the tenets of a good curriculum, what are the structures, and one of the things Malcolm Knowles is really known about adult learning is that we learn by doing. So really then you're creating a program where people have a lot of experiential learning, workplace-based assessments, formal teaching, but also facilitating a space for self-directed learning and peer-to-peer learning. And I liked the term that Dr. Nazik used about the biomedical cloud, you know, the fact that right now, the access to research, the access to knowledge is really more available compared to when you had to really put in so much, you know, at the click of a button and with the right direction in terms of knowing which sites to access. You really have a lot, even more than you can be able to consume. So I think really the bigger program is, the bigger question is, how is a program designed and delivered? And also a reality in our setup is what is accessible? And then what are the requirements of the program? What are the requirements from the institution and the accreditation body? And this is where I think a lot of challenges faced by many people who want to pursue training in hematology, because you realize that as you're looking for opportunities of where to go for training, the requirements may make it not to be accessible. And as we are increasing the discussion and also many programs are being developed, like I recall when I was going for training just a couple of months, I think the next year is when the program in Kenya started. And it takes time to really apply for these programs. You really need a lot of guidance. So it's very good that this discussion is happening. And even beyond the training, there's what I put as a post-training environment, that even beyond that period of training, there's that aspect of, you know, making sure that you remain competent, that aspect of still being in touch with your colleagues and consulting, finding what they are doing in their setup, which for me has really been fascinating when I have a challenging case and I reach out to colleagues in different parts of the country, because you get to realize the need of what Professor Williams has clearly stated, that we need to come with our own solutions, something that's homegrown. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, because a lot has been done in research, but then we need to ask the question, how are we able to apply this in our setup in a practical way? Professor Abinya pointed out just a simple issue about, you know, the environment in which we live in. And I have many times I have consulted colleagues on a challenging case, and if it's someone from the West who's in a resource, in a center where they have lots of resources. Many times, the email would go like, "This is what we would do in our setup. This is very challenging, given the limited options that are there." So, but I think even consulting within the region and knowing with some of the constraints we have in terms of resources, because this is real, what is it that someone is doing in another unit? What are they doing in their setup with what they have? And then networking, of course, which happens a lot during meetings, and then research. I agree so much with what Dr. Ezi has mentioned, that a lot of the times you realize that there's very little interest in terms of research. And then also part of it is that support towards doing research. So yesterday I was in an elated mood because of a research project I've been trying to get off the feet for the past year and a half. And it's really, when I compare with what I saw in the West and during the training, I realize there's a lot more that can be done to facilitate research. And then, of course, the aspect of mentorship. Mentorship is something that's been mentioned over and over again, but that's an area which, as we move along, I think there's a lot that can be done, and a lot that has been done already, and lots of room for improvement. So I'll look at different pathways. One of the things that I found is that majority of specialists trained outside due to lack of local programs. But this is changing. And then opportunities were based on those who were able to access them. And for various reasons, whether it is getting the sponsorship in terms of going the training that's outside, because there are things like accommodation, you still need to eat, beyond the learning, transport. So then there was limited access. And what you'd find is many people would train to the specialty level, and then when it comes to subspecialty, that number significantly goes down. But the light at the end of the tunnel, as he had said, is that many regions and countries are actually developing programs. And what I'll do is just look at it in sort of a block fashion, and I will start with East Africa. So I'm glad that Professor Binya is here, and really as a champion in terms of medical oncology program. And during this time also, it's a 2-year program that now has the third, I think the third class, yes. And this is done after training in internal medicine. And during this time, they get exposure in clinical hematology and also some time in the lab. In Uganda, they've not had a pathway for a long time, but that's now been set. It's up and running, that after medical school and internal medicine training, that there's a clinical fellowship in hematology. And what you'll find is that there also seems to be a pathology track in most of the countries. In fact, like in Kenya, we have pathologists who, after medical school, they did pathology and went into hematopathology. And some of them actually practice the clinical aspect of hematology. So, and then in Rwanda just has 3 practicing hematologists. They don't have a program. And of those 3, again, one had, I think he trained in Belgium. This was, did his fellowship in hematology after internal medicine. And then the others trained in South Africa, I'll go through the South Africa pathway. And in Ethiopia, they do have a program which is linked also to the internal medicine. And I think Dr. Nazik, when she was responding to our question, alluded to the aspect of that which is mirrored in most of these programs that you see. A lot of them are in the background of internal medicine. And we'll see in other programs also in pediatrics. There's a speaker from Nigeria, so I will not talk about the Nigeria model, but the contact person I had from there, said that subspecialization training is gaining a lot of momentum. Then when you look more to the south, Zimbabwe, the hematologist I got in touch with there did his training in South Africa, but mentioned that they are starting a program in hematology next year. So that will be exciting to see. It's clear, I think, when I show you what happens in the West, looking at the program in South Africa, it mirrors a lot of what happens in the West, and that is with regard to the format of training. You have 4 years of training in FC path hematology or MED hematology, then 2 extra years of training fellowship in clinical hematology, 1 in internal medicine, and then the other year in the hematology unit and the leukemia unit. Or you have a track where you have internal medicine and then 2 years of training in clinical hematology, again, 1 in lab and another in the heme and leukemia unit. And there's also, this is just for medical oncology, where there's 4 years of internal medicine and then 2 years of medical oncology. And then there are 2 exit exams. So that's just a snapshot of some of the programs that are existing and some of the pathways that are there from the contacts that I was able to get. So looking at this is a pathway for UK. And there was a nice article, it was interesting to see this, how to become a hematologist, just published in the BMJ. But it really goes through what the track is in the UK program, whereby after medical school, they have a 2-year foundation training. This would be almost similar to the internship. And then after this, they go into internal medicine for 2 years or pediatrics. And then this other pathway is for those who would want to focus on academia. And after this, they will do an MRCP exam. And then thereafter, go into hematology training. And you can see for them, really, the hematology training is quite extensive, 5 years. And during this time, after that, they get an FRC path, and there are 2 exams, part 1 and part 2. And then after the completion of training, then there's the usual credentialing. And this website that I've included here in my slide actually has quite an extensive information on the hematology curriculum, looking at the different competencies, what they call capacities in training, and what is required for each participant. In the US, I think Professor Williams will correct me if I mention something here that is not right. But it was interesting when the accreditation body for the US, this is the body that accredits all medical training programs from medical school, fellowships, residency programs. For them, it's clear that hematology is an internal medicine subspecialty, that focuses, you know, on the care of patients with blood, bone marrow, and other lymphatic and immunologic, hemostatic, and vascular systems. And then also it clearly defines medical oncology. This was also another good document to go through in terms of getting just all the nitty-gritties of what is required for a program. So pretty much there would be the basic sciences, medical school, then internal medicine, and then a hemato-oncology pathway, which would also include lab. So in conclusion, what I would say is, I think my encouragement is once a doctor in training realizes what they want to do, then it's really to be in conversation with the experts and on the ground, both locally and internationally, to see what are the opportunities are there, what are the programs which are available. And this again would only be done through mentorship. And this would help a lot in terms of guiding, you know, what pathways should you take, so that it's not confusing or you're not just left to choose on your own. Some of us had to figure things out, but so this conversation for me is actually really a good one, because then you already are starting the discussion of, okay, for someone who's interested in medical oncology, what do I, you know, which pathways are there, what's there in Africa? And maybe even AORTIC can have a one-pager where they have all the pathways which are available locally, and, you know, the program director, so that when you have a candidate or someone who's interested, then they can reach out and say, okay, is this a program that I can pursue? And the other thing I would really encourage, if someone is listening and they've not done their subspecialty, is that no step is small. Just start and take up whatever opportunity. Initially, they may come as observerships. I know that was true in my case. And as you await your main training, and what you may find is that these opportunities then become building blocks into the career path which you want to develop. So thank you very much. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share on the subject. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gandhi, for a very informative presentation. I learned a lot from you. We are running out of time, so we'll just progress right now to the presentation of Professor Durosimi. And then after that, hopefully we'll take some time to speak. Thank you. Dr. Durosimi, please take it over.
You. We look at the challenges of in training postgraduate doctors in hemato-oncology in a developing economy in terms of teaching staff, research, programs, and equipment. The training in hematologic malignancies in Nigeria has been a component of the postgraduate fellowship training programs since the inception of the laboratory medicine that is offered by both the Faculty of Laboratory Medicine of the West African College of Physicians, established in 1976 for the training of medical specialists in West African sub-region, and the Faculty of Pathology of the National Postgraduate Medical College of Nigeria, established in 1979 for the training of specialist doctors in all branches of medicine and dentistry, that is for Nigerians. We have the National Postgraduate Medical College of Nigeria, which accredits training institutions, conducts examinations, and is also responsible for certification of postgraduate medical and dental specialists in the country. Then the West African College of Physicians, which accredits training institutions, conducts examinations, and is responsible for certification of postgraduate medical and data specialists in West African sub-region, including the Anglophone countries of Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia. And recently, the Francophone countries have also joined: Benin Republic, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, and Senegal. Training programs is run in accredited teaching and specialist hospitals across the country. The Faculty of Pathology of Laboratory Medicine runs 4 core specialties: chemical pathology, anatomic pathology, hematology, and medical microbiology. This training will in all run for 5 years for each of the specialties in both colleges, the West Africa and Nigerian College. Success at the primary examination is required for enrollment into the training program. That is to say, after your MBBS and the national service, you will have to do the primary examination to join the training program in pathology. The Part 1 fellowship examination is written after a minimum of 24 months into the training, including 15 months in the candidate's primary department and 9 months, that is 3 months each, in the 3 cognate departments. That is to say, if you are for hematology, for you to qualify to write your Part 1, you have to rotate 3 months each in chemical pathology, anatomic pathology, and medical microbiology, and spend 15 months in hematology, at the end of which you will write your Part 1 examination. For the West African certificate, you can get the membership of the West African College of Physicians, but Nigeria does not run that. If you succeed with your Part 1, you go for the Part 2 fellowship, which is 36 months in any of the programs. In hematology, for example, it is 36 months in hematology department only, at the end of which you will get the fellowship of the West African College of Physicians, or fellowship of the Medical College in Pathology, hematology specialty. The Part 2 program for hematology, this involves core hematology postings, laboratories, including blood transfusion, clinicals, inpatients and outpatients, including hematologic malignancies, seminars, ward rounds, journal meetings, and you also spend 6 months in internal medicine and pediatrics. At the end, you prepare a dissertation on a research topic. We do not run a PhD program. It is a fellowship program that we run in the country. Over 90% of practicing hematologists in Nigeria are products of either or both of the colleges. Graduates of either of the colleges are the only source of teaching staff in the basic clinical and clinical sciences faculties of the increasing number of medical schools across the country. What one is saying in effect is that hematology training in Nigeria is clinical. There is no pure laboratory training. You combine the two. That is hemato-oncology and benign clinical hematology program. Teaching staff for the residency programs are consultant specialists in accredited teaching and specialist staff in various fields of laboratory medicine, clinical chemistry, hematology, histopathology, medical microbiology and parasitology, internal medicine, surgery, and pediatrics. What are the challenges of residency training? The major challenge with the training programs is inadequate number of qualified staff for the size of the country and the increasing growth of laboratory medicine. Residents have to undergo parts of their trainings in accredited sister institutions in areas where their institutions of primary employment lack accreditation. This eventually increase the cost of training. Challenges of training in hemato-oncology. Inadequate stem cell transplantation centers for the need of the population. Molecular diagnostic facilities for hematologic malignancies are difficult to access in the majority of training centers. However, private laboratories do serve as alternates. Flow cytometry for optimal classification of leukemic cells are just becoming popular, but immunohistochemical staining is readily available. Immunophenotyping is also available because we are now using both biological and conventional chemotherapeutic agents for management of hematological cancers. Cytogenetic laboratories are inadequate, but we do have some. We do have in some of our institutions. Residents are encouraged to undergo further training in areas of needs outside the country. I enjoyed such a program during my training. However, things have improved because we now have quite many centers these days where facilities are available within the country. So instead of traveling outside, you can rotate within the country to centers of excellence. Practicing fellows are also encouraged to go for post-fellowship training in specialized hemato-oncology programs in other parts of the world. Fellows are strongly encouraged to participate in international collaborative studies. Usually, in the course of our training, we manage all the various types of hematological cancers. Treatment facilities are also available. Chemotherapy, biological therapy, radiotherapy, and stem cell transplantation, although we have only one center. we do refer patients to other parts of the world. So in conclusion, hematology oncology training is already well established in the country. Although because of problems, of economic problems, there are challenges with facilities. Efforts are being made to improve on the treatment. Government is now developing chemotherapy access partnership with some foreign countries. We have Clinton Health Access Program, which is aimed at reducing the cost of chemotherapy, because this is a very strong limitation to adequate treatment of our patients because of the inadequate or poor inadequate national health insurance, which makes out-of-pocket expenses very difficult for most of the patients. So I think, I think I should stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Drosine. We've actually gone over our time, but I'm sure are there some questions for Professor Drosine? I'm sure he'll be happy to have any. I don't see anything here in Q&A. Anybody else has any comments or questions?
We thank Mhes for highlighting what is going on in Nigeria.
Yeah, thank you. Listen, I would like to make a comment. I'm surprised about what Professor Drosine described, but that is the way things are right now. I left Nigeria in 1986. That's a long time ago. And what he described now seems to have been what obtained then. One of the reasons why I went to Nigeria in 1978 was to establish medical oncology. The way it was being done in the United States, it was very, very difficult. It was not possible because people couldn't figure out what I was talking about. And that seems to continue to be the situation. I believe that what Professor Drosine has described is actually essentially a training program in laboratory medicine. That this is not medical oncology. And it is my hope that the various colleges would actually put their heads together and work out a program for medical oncology, such as has been done in Kenya and East Africa, and such that Professor Ahmed described. Somehow, pathology is very, very, very strong in Nigeria, and also surgery, and the idea of, I mean, you cannot have a program in medical oncology like subspecialty where you spend only 6 months in medicine. So that would be my comment about this situation.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Yeah, the postgraduate medical college is working at starting medical oncology program.
Okay, all right. Now, so you don't have I'm very happy to hear.
It's starting.
Okay.
We already have the radiation oncology. That has been for a long time, but medical oncology program is coming on board.
So you say you need that kind of thing if you're going to make an impact in terms of successful management outcomes. Even in malignant oncology, you still need to have a strong background in internal medicine. And until that is accepted, what you have right now is a training in laboratory medicine.
Anyway, notice that when you are around, we are not rotating through internal medicine or pediatrics.
That's a long time ago.
Yes. We started that some years ago now.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, as I said, I left Nigeria back in 1986. So, but I would have thought that things should have moved forward, I mean, changed, progressed more, you know. Anyway, anybody else has any comments for any comments in general? I think we've had a wonderful session. I've enjoyed every presentation, but if anybody else has any comments to make in general, Nazik, you're back. Do you have any comments?
Well, I'm sorry I missed many of the talks, but I'm very happy to see that we have come together for this, and that there's going to be medical oncology in Nigeria, and hopefully that will be the creation of a program director group that will share the lessons and learn from each other. So I think it's very exciting.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else has any comments? Professor Binya?
No, Chris, this is a good initiative, and I think bringing people together like this through you and AORTIC is a great idea. And I think we should learn cross-continent collaborations. And their countries have different strengths and weaknesses. And we should actually borrow from each other and interact. The problem with Sub-Saharan Africa is people stand on their own and want to do their things without collaborating with others. And this doesn't really help very much.
Unfortunately, that's very African, but I hope you'll be able to change it. You know, with somebody like Nazik around, it would change.
No, it's all of you guys, but I think it would be great to hear more about the medical oncology program in Nigeria, and maybe we can have another, future session again about how this is happening and how the medical oncology.
You have to bring us up to date sometime later and tell us how medical oncology is evolving in Nigeria.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.